A very good evening to you and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. A day of drama as President Cyril Ramaphosa's hand is forced, and hours after reluctantly releasing that damning report on the infamous 150 million rands Digital Vibes contract, he finally gets to bite the bullet and open up to South Africans about his former health minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize. On the show this evening, SIU head advocate Andy Mkhize is in studio to take us through that report. We'll also bring you President Ramaphosa's first public comments to that report from a roundtable discussion he just had with journalists. Later on, analysts Professors Mkhize and Stephen Friedman weigh in on the attendant political issues this explosive episode has thrown up. That and more on this evening's edition of The Watchdog, which starts right now. Well, welcome, Advocate, and thank you very much for agreeing to come through this evening.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
It did take some time for you to, of course, go through everything you needed to go through to actually get to a point where a couple of months ago you were able to give the president the report. Were there any particular problems that were out of the ordinary that you encountered in the course of doing your investigation up to the point of actually coming up with the report?
No, Phil, once more, thank you very much for the opportunity. When we got the allegations, which was around February, the good part is that by that time, we already had the proclamation R23 of 2020, which was focusing on PPE irregularities. So in the normal run of events, when we get allegations, we would then draft a proclamation which would go through the process, go through our Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, and then it would go to the president for sign-off. But this time, already we had a proclamation, and we really hit the ground running. Mm-hmm. And we understood the agency that was behind these allegations once it got reported by the media. So our team, we do have a capable members of SIU who are able to investigate such complex matters. So we went off and got the necessary documentation from the Department of Health. And I should really say that the Department of Health and the officials, through the DGs, were cooperative. And we got those documentation, analyzed them, and we immediately knew where to focus, what to look at. And once we started, I should really say we never really had obstacles. There was cooperation, and even including when we really had to go and do some of the analysis of the bank statements and so on. And I need to also just acknowledge our colleagues at the Fusion Center, in particular the Financial Intelligence Center, because they are very critical in terms of how we trace these monies to ensure that ultimately we freeze them and ensure that when we do the recoveries, we are able to find the monies, as you may know. So as we investigated, we immediately realized, and by that time, of course, there was some internal investigation, as you know, that the former Minister of Health made a public announcement of the outcome of the internal investigation. Mm. But we had to start almost afresh. Mm. Of course, look into what that investigation came out with, but we had to make sure that we really dive deep into the issues, and we did that. So the outcomes that we reached, that firstly, we found that the contract was awarded irregular, and remember this was a two-pronged irregular approach by the department, which firstly, they engaged the digital vibes irregularly for purposes of NHI communication. And after engaging them for NHI communication, not following the process, as I say, irregularly, COVID-19 came and the state of disaster was declared. And again, irregularly, the department, just really, appointed digital vibes to now conduct the communication. Contrary, as we say in the report, contrary to what cabinet would have directed, that GCIS, which is the government communications and information system, that they be responsible for that. So
I want us now to sort of go through the aspects, of this one by one in, of course, the limited time that we have. Now, you discovered that Dr. Mkhize, then health minister, instructed his departmental officials to actually, come up with this contract for the engagement of digital vibes. It is now with respect to the PPE stuff. Of course, coming on the back of them having irregularly, as you have already pointed out, sourced the services of digital vibes for NHI. But for the purposes of this conversation, I want us to focus a bit on the PPE contract.
Right.
So it was the minister who actually instructed the departmental officials to contract these people.
Look, that's what we find, make a finding in the report. Because the way we found, there's evidence that demonstrated to us that from the onset, when the budgets were signed, right, for this communication for COVID, as would be expected of the executive authority, which is the political head of a department and the former minister in this case, right, when he would be given, as it was the practice in the department, to table the budgets with the minister to sign off and approve. In that approval, there was the way the company Digital Vibe. So the evidence points out that the minister approved the budget for the work to be granted to Digital Vibe. And for us, in terms of the law and the policies and the Public Finance Management Act, it's wrong to do that.
For the minister
to
sign off on such contracts.
Yeah, on the budget with the name of the service provider. Because remember, signing the budget, which in principle could really be nothing wrong, because the executive authority has to make sure that there's sufficient budget, to execute on policy initiatives and so on. But in this regard, in this case, the budget was put to the minister to approve with the name of Digital Vibe there. So our view is, with the evidence that we have collected that the minister was aware of this Digital Vibe, particularly even in the report we say that he had prior knowledge of this company from the Department of Cocta. So once he signed that, there is a further evidence that shows, and your point, and we make that point in the report, that the communication that he sent by WhatsApp to the then Director General to say, sort out the contract, right? That kind of language indicates that there's some process that was not followed. You just had to sort out the contract, right? And for us, it's problematic because in that case there is a clear demonstration that there was no anticipation or an envisaged SCM process to be followed.
Now, add to that the fact that there was a rival bidder in terms of the information that you got,
Yes.
who were prepared to do this job for less than half what Digital Vibes was asking. What was the department's, tender committee response when you put that to them? That how do you justify, enlisting the services of a bidder that is asking for more than twice the price?
That's one of the other parts of our findings. That was on the part of the department, including those who sat on the bid committee. It was inexplicable. And remember, the outcome of those committees is the outcome of members who are sitting on those committees and giving scores, right? So our finding was that some of those members who sat on those committees, right, deliberately granted higher scores to Digital Vibes, unjustifiably. Because if you look at the evidence that we have produced, or the report, it actually says Digital Vibe, by the time that it was granted the business, it had only 1 year of almost relevant experience. The rival, which we mentioned in the report, which is Branswell, which we found that it had several years' experience, and we went through meticulously on members of each companies, right? On this other rival company, we found that they had such wealth of experience related to the business that the department wanted to be executed. So it really indicated to us that there was a measure of manipulation of the process, including in the bid committee itself, so that Digital Vibes could deliberately score high over and above the rival company that we mentioned in the report. So to your question, it was inexplicable on the part of the department. There's just no explanation.
And not only that, from the report you found evidence that suggested that Digital Vibes, that is, went out of their way to actually conceal the companies or the credentials, and the profiles of the people who are actually behind Digital Vibes, so as to create an impression that this was an entity that was owned by and run by people who had nothing to do with the health minister, when in fact the opposite was true.
Correct. You've hit the nail on the head. That's why in the report there's a section where we actually refer to fronting. That when the two individuals that are mentioned in the report used this company to get the business, in fact, the owner of this company was unaware. When we interviewed the owner of this company, was unaware, in fact, including how much the company was paid. She was unaware of that. And she even went to an extent of opening up a criminal case at the time when she became aware. So that's really how damning it is. And that's why we have even referred this company, Digital Vibes, and those individuals, because we found that they misrepresented the facts to the department. And that misrepresentation makes out fraud, right? And that fraud evidence, we've now referred it to NPA for consideration, and of course our preference is the ultimate prosecution, because the evidence is quite clear.
Okay, let's look now at some of the people you have something to say about what should happen to them. The acting DG at the time, Mr. Pillay, Popomaja, who is a communications officer in the department, you are recommending that in Pillay's case, who is dubbed in your report, and as I quote, one of, if not the main actor in this saga, you are recommending that he should be criminally prosecuted for alleged financial misconduct and fraud. But was it just Pillay? Or should it just be Pillay whom you are making recommendations against?
No, great. Thank you for that question. The evidence that we have uncovered actually points out quite a number of individuals who could be charged criminally. So at the time when we submitted the report, and you'll see in the report itself that the investigation was still ongoing, right? So when we concluded the evidence or the report, already there were indications that we are going to really make findings against others. And when we made a referral to NPA, which was after we submitted the report to the President, by that time the evidence had uncovered evidence pointing to other individuals. So we've referred evidence of fraud, corruption, money laundering, and you would have seen also that there's contravention of the Income Tax Act. We've referred that part to the South African Revenue Service. So it's not, as we speak, it's not only Anban Pillay.
Okay. In other words, since your submission of the report to the President, there's been a lot of subsequent, work that has been done subsequently, which mean that a whole lot of other people will be or can be prosecuted. What about Dr. Mkhize himself, who together with his family members financially benefited from the contract, your report says. A contract, as you said right at the beginning, that in itself, came into effect on the back of improper, if not unlawful conduct.
Right.
Have you made any specific recommendations subsequently with regard to what should happen to the former minister?
Right. We are actually on record. When we presented to SCOPA not so long ago, part of what we presented included the basis for a referral of the minister. Firstly, a referral to the President, because he reported to the President, and we call that a referral for executive action.
Well, he's no longer there now.
That was at the time. He was still there when we made the referral for executive action. Okay? And by executive action is almost similar to when you take a disciplinary, or we recommend disciplinary action for those employees that are covered by the Labor Relations Act. But as an executive authority, you're really not subject to the Labor Relations Act, so then it's an executive action. So as part of indicating the evidence we've uncovered to the President in the referral, we have indicated exactly that he received so much money for renovation of the house, his relatives received so much money, because that we did in line with the definition of corruption as contained in the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. So, based on that evidence, in the referral firstly, when we made the referral to the President, we did say that the minister may have made himself guilty of a criminal offense, right? So we took that evidence and referred it to the NPA. By law, SIU, when it finds that there's a evidence pointing to criminal action, we are expected by law, the legislation that governs our business, we are expected to send that evidence to NPA, and these days we even copy the Hawks, because there is still some investigation that requires to be done. So, and as we speak now, that investigation is still ongoing. It's prosecutor-led. There's prosecutors that are allocated to that investigation. And of course, we are one way or another kept abreast of the developments. And we are really hopeful, and we believe that very soon there would be the results that we envisage in terms of the criminal outcomes.
I'm interested.
The minister is the evidence pointing to a criminal action that may make the minister guilty of an offence is part of the evidence that we refer to the NPA.
I'm interested in what you make of this. According to your report, Digital Vibes paid 6,720 rands for repairs at a property belonging to the minister.
Correct.
And the former minister's response to your investigators is that I never requested the service.
Yes. And in the report, we actually go further and say, well, you remember in our investigation, when we find that there's adverse findings that we are going to make against anyone that we investigate, whose name appears that we are about to make adverse findings against, we then have to give them the opportunity to come and state their case. And the minister was given the opportunity to come and be questioned under oath. So, and we've included it in the report that the minister gave us an explanation saying, you know, there's someone with a similar surname who might have, you know, been involved. And at the end of that analysis, we find that explanation unacceptable, and we really find it that it's not plausible, and we have made those findings still.
What else is on your radar right now that's got to do with your with COVID-19, PPEs, and all of that stuff?
Okay. You recall when we reported recently, particularly to Scopa, we said, you know, we were busy investigating more than 4,000 contracts, and the contract values of those contracts is about 14.8 billion. And we had given ourselves the timeline, and we put the timeline of the end of August for the matters that would have been on our books at around June, July. So we have since finalized those investigations. There's a few. Remember, we continue to get evidence or allegations. So we are still, there's very few that are still ongoing, but most of the provinces have completed these investigations. So we are really at almost at the end, and we are now working towards submitting the final report, which is a very complex process, but we have said we will submit the final report by the end of November. But we have made several findings, and of course we continue to get allegations and evidence. And we are very pleased about the process of seeking to recover the monies that have been lost by the state. The special tribunal is proving to be the best tool that could have been provided. You know, the president signed off and proclaimed this special tribunal in 2019, but already as we sit today, we've got matters to the value of more than 7 billion that are sitting at the special tribunal to be adjudicated and be ordered on, and the recoveries be pronounced on. In this matter of Digital Vibes, you would know that we had made a freezing order of about 22 million, but we are at the special tribunal to set this contract aside and do the subsequent recoveries. Now, another point that you may want to know is that some of the people that we have made findings against in this investigation have come up to us and said, no, we received monies, we want to pay them back. So,
and how much are we talking about?
In about 2 or 3 weeks back, there's one of them who came and paid about 11 million back into the SIU trust account, which we will ultimately pay back to the Department of Health so that it can be used for what it was meant for. Does
that absolve those people?
It doesn't. It doesn't absolve, and thanks for asking that. It doesn't absolve them at all. And they are still part of the respondents in the papers that we have served at the special tribunal.
So we haven't seen anything yet. There's still a lot more to come just on this saga alone.
Correct. There's quite a number of cases that are still in the pipeline that will be issued at the special tribunal. And on the general consequence management side, we are seeing that the departments are really acting on those officials who made themselves guilty of misconduct. And of course, ultimately, we would like to see those who made themselves guilty of criminal offenses being prosecuted. We also referring to other regulatory authorities. There's a whole number of companies that contravened even the South African Health Products Act, and we refer them to SAPRA. Those who contravened the Competitions Act, we refer them to Competitions Authority. So we would like to see, ultimately, this whole scheme of holding everyone to account being properly executed so that this culture of impunity, that nothing will happen to me, it comes to an end.
Advocate Andy Mkhize, thanks very much for your time and insights this evening.
Thank you very much, we appreciate the opportunity.
Of course, he is the head of the SIU on the back of the release today of that damning report on the infamous 150 million rands digital vibes contract. Up next, we get to hear what the president said literally minutes ago when he was asked by journalists about this very same report. Whereafter, we get to hear Professors Mkhize and Stephen Friedman weighing in on the attendant political ramifications of not only this report, but how the president of the ANC, the president of the country, has actually handled this whole saga, coming as this all does on the eve of a very important election for his party. That and more coming up in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. Day of drama as President Cyril Ramaphosa's hand gets forced, and hours after that he gets to be asked questions about that damning report of the SIU that has to do with the 150 million rands digital vibes contract. Asked just before 8 o'clock by journalists as to whether what he had to say around the findings of the SIU. This is what President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say in part.
We condemn all activities of malfeasance. That is a fact. And his resignation from government was, in my view, an act which was, you may not like this word, honorable on his part, when he realized that there was no other way in which we could go forward, and he then decided to resign. My acceptance of his resignation should tell you exactly the approach and the stance that I am determined to take on all these matters.
President Cyril Ramaphosa, after responding to journalists' questions a short while ago. Let's bring in Professors Mkhize and Stephen Friedman to talk us through, some of what they heard there from the president, but also, of course, the implications for the president, the implications for Dr. Zweli Mkhize himself, the implications also for the party, the ANC, as it state is about to confront perhaps the most critical or important election that they have ever faced, given what has happened in the past two elections, local and national. Good evening to both of you, professors. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Apologies for coming to you a little late than we thought we would. There was just so much to unpack with the head of the SIU. Now, President Ramaphosa received this report early in July. And tomorrow is the last day of September, Professor Friedman. What could have taken him so long to release it?
Well, I assume that he was trying to manage it politically. I don't know quite what he's been doing in the interim, but clearly the decision was taken within his office that the right time to manage this politically was to bring it out now. I mean, we all know that these corruption cases create tensions within the governing party. He is the president of the governing party as well as the president of the country. And the approach that he's been taken since he became president is to try to handle these matters in a way which minimize those tensions. But I think we need to put this in perspective. I'm afraid that the reaction to corruption has become a bit ritualized in this country because we don't know when we're making progress. The fact that there's a report at all is progress. The fact that I'm confident that action will be taken as a result of the report is progress. Some people might find that progress too slow, but I can think of a lot of countries in which there wouldn't be that progress. So I think we need to understand that the country is beginning to make some headway on this issue. We don't know how far it will go. But certainly I think we're in a situation now where there seems to be a more serious attempt to deal with these issues by various institutions than there has been, I think, in the country's history.
The statement, Professor Ndlejana, that came out of the presidency this morning was interesting for me. 4 sentences to be exact. And here's one that caught my particular attention. It was a 3rd sentence, and I quote, "This was done," the release of the report that is, "this was done in the interests of fairness and in terms of the Promotion of Access to Information Act, PAIA, following a number of PAIA applications by persons and parties who wished to have sight of the report." Which suggests to me that if it wasn't for that, it wasn't for all these people who are worried about being implicated, and wanting to find out so that they can, protect themselves, or start finding lawyers or whatever the case may have been, we probably wouldn't have seen this report still.
I don't think so. I think there was a lot of pressure. There was commitment made from early on to have this released. I don't think the president would have succeeded even if he wanted to hide it. But I think there is a lot of sensitivity around or within the ANC about embarrassing others. It's a strange thing. Whilst everybody else frowns upon corruption and, people tell us how much they resent this scourge, and yet there is tentativeness in dealing with it, within the ANC particularly. So their actions don't always match their pronouncement on this issue. And of course, Cyril is also dealing with a very delicate province, where he has to balance a whole lot of issues to make sure that it doesn't alienate the provincial leaders, national figure like Mkhize, who comes from that province. It's a fairly big province. So there are politics that have to be dealt with. But what is pleasing, though, is that, I'm really excited with the tone of Advocate Mothibi, the passion in his voice, the dedication. There was a time, as Stephen was saying, there was a time in this country in the last 10 years or so, we would not have this kind of investigations. But the fact that you have these kinds of findings, Wanavoyo, is worrisome. And the brazenness with which Mkhize committed these things is really worrisome. If you can do it with this kind of ease, then you have to wonder what else has it done? Who else is doing it? Because it strikes you. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that he did not think he would be found out. This was normal, sending SMSs, fix these contracts, do this, do that. So if this figure could do this at a time where we were dealing with this pandemic, we had scarce resources. If you could do that, then I dread to think what else is happening in other parts of the government.
Professor Friedman, in answering my first question, you said he was the president. When I asked you what took him so long, what do you think took him so long to release this report? You said he was the president that is managing, the politics of his organization. Now, we have weeks to go before a very critical local government election for the ANC. At what point, especially when things appear as obvious as, Professor Ndletyana has actually described them when he was talking about the brazenness with which Dr. Mkhize did or got involved in this whole saga. At what point does an ANC president then say, you know what, I have to look after, or I have to speak to the electorate, the people who are looking at me, up to me, to actually give them, the clearest indication that we have indeed moved away from these kinds of practices, as we have been saying to them is actually the case?
Well, we have a political culture in this country, and obviously we've only been a democracy for 27 years. And it's a political culture in which, to be very blunt, the politicians and the elites matter more than the voters. The thought process of the president of the ANC, and it would be the same in the other parties, is firstly, how do I keep my party together? How do I manage the conflicts in my party? The voters come about third in that calculation, quite a way behind that. And really, we've been like this always, I think. I used to have a standing comment during the struggle period that when somebody in the struggle told you that they'd spoken to the people, it meant that they'd spoken to the next level of activists down, because that's in their world who the people were. So this process of going to the voters, of getting the voters on your side, is not something which is done here. It's something which should be done here, but it's not something that's done here. So if you look at President Ramaphosa's approach, it's a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, to try to fix the institutions of government, which is a very necessary thing to do, but that doesn't involve citizens. So you try to make sure that the NPA operates as it should, that the Hawks do, that the SIU do. And quite a lot of progress has been made on that. And the other one is that you try to get the politicians on side. So SABC very, I think, accurately described what has been going on within the ANC, particularly the tensions around KZN. And remember that Zweli Mkhize, the departed minister, played a very complicated role at the NASREC conference. He wasn't a staunch ally of the president's. And therefore, this was something which had to be politically managed. And I'm afraid the reality is that in the thought processes of all our politicians across the board, regardless of party, managing what other politicians think is far more important to them than what voters think.
Professor Ndletyana, as late as a couple of years ago, and Professor Friedman just touched on it as well just now, the complicated role, he says, Dr. Mkhize played. Now, Dr. Mkhize saw himself as, and was seen by some in the ANC as presidential material. And he hails, as you have just said, from that province of the ANC, which is probably more complicated than the rest. What do you think? How do you think this king is going to play itself out, given how damning this report is, the fix that it is putting everyone in the ANC, from the president down, and not only, because of this election, but beyond this election. Remember, in another couple of years' time, we're going to a national election.
Well, I think President Ramaphosa has been quite savvy in dealing with this. He's most likely consulted with KZN leaders, told them what he was going to do, because he's careful not to be seen to be embarrassing Dr. Mkhize. This whole thing about disgracing people is a very big thing in the ANC, that even if you are guilty, you shouldn't be, thrown down to the floor and be kicked and all that. Because Dr. Mkhize also remains a fairly popular figure in that part of the country. So you need to handle how you deal with him properly. So I don't think there will be any backlash for the president. But as for Mkhize, his presidential ambition is gone. He's unlikely to bounce back from this. But you see,
I didn't clear my throat. Sorry, bro.
Yeah, but the key thing that we need, that this tells us, is that the impropriety that we've been talking about within government is widespread, and the folks that we thought were good folks are actually not so good. You don't have a clear delineation between bad and good people. Because, I was, Dr. Mkhize is a very impressive person, talks eloquently, very articulate, and most people who have worked with him say he's hardworking. And yet there's this other dark side to him that we have now seen. And so there are probably many other people who are supposedly part of the Tumamina Brigade, these renewal disciples, who might seem to be clean, but in fact they are not. One of the key things that I've always wondered about, for instance, Vuyo, is the non-renewal of Robert McBride's contract. Everyone agreed that McBride was doing a stunning job uprooting corruption in the police department, when everyone knew that there was a lot of corruption there. And yet when his contract had to be renewed, normally in a normal world, see, when you've done a good job, you get rewarded with your contract being renewed because you've done a good job. But in this case, it was not renewed. And so, and Minister Mkhize and the whole parliament, the whole ANC caucus was part of this. So it is worrying that a party that purports to be fighting against corruption would not want someone who had demonstrable success against fighting corruption. What does that tell you? Why would they remove someone who's been doing a good job against corruption? So this talk of Tumamina renewal, there's a lot of facade in there. We need to probe beneath the surface.
To what extent then, Professor Friedman, does this in a way strengthen, the hand of people like, within the party that is, of people like Ace Magashule, who has been saying he's being unfairly targeted, because we're basically all the same, just like Batabile Dlamini once said, we all have skeletons, so don't start, because you don't know where this might end.
Well, it may well be that everybody's got skeletons, but some have more obvious skeletons than others. And I think that affects the way this plays out politically. I'm not sure that it strengthens Makhashule's hand at all. Part of the elephant in the room in the politics that we've been talking about is presumably the fear that if Dr. Mkhize had felt that he was badly treated, and I agree that he probably has been mollified, that he would get together with the KwaZulu-Natal ANC and sort of revive the kind of politics which lost at Nasrec, or lost the presidency at Nasrec. I agree that I think this has been handled in a way in which that's unlikely. Even if that had happened, I think Mkhize would have been one of the first victims, quite frankly. Because an alliance like that, led by Dr. Mkhize, would be, to put it bluntly, a lot more sophisticated and a lot more subtle than one run by Mr. Mkhize.
You know, Prof, I always go back to the tax policy conference, which of course then led everyone, the ANC, to Polokwane, because I mean that was like a proxy conference for what was going to happen in Polokwane. I mean, many people who threw their weight behind Jacob Zuma. I mean, some of them didn't even like him. They didn't want him to be, given a choice, they would not have wanted him to be the president of the ANC. But this disparate group of people put, their weight, their efforts, everything, threw it at him or behind him because it was the only way they could defeat the one person, that they didn't want. So, I mean, it's not foreseeable then in the future that things could change. What you think may not happen or won't be the case in KwaZulu-Natal may well turn out to be what actually happens in the end, depending, on who wants what and are prepared to go to what extent to get what they want.
Well, I think that's their hope. The point I was making, Vuyo, is that if that were to happen, I don't think Ace Mkhize is going to find himself in the same position as Jacob Zuma did then. I don't think he's the obvious choice if you want to beat the Ramaphosa faction, for the reasons that I've outlined. So I think either way, he loses out. Will that faction revive under a different sort of leadership? I suspect not. I think that the tide is going against them, but I agree with Sabisi entirely. And in fact, to get a plug in, I've just written a book arguing precisely that, which has been published recently, that this isn't about good guys and bad guys, that it's about a very embedded pattern, which incidentally didn't begin in 1994, probably began shortly after 1652. The one thing which I think, and that's also a worry for Mkhize and may also be a worry for Dr. Mkhize, I agree that the good guys in the ANC aren't necessarily very good. But I think one change since Mr. Ramaphosa became president, and I think it's a huge change, and it's one of the reasons that we're seeing what we see, is this point I made earlier, that he has made quite a lot of headway in fixing the criminal justice institutions so that we have a functioning National Prosecuting Authority. We have a functioning SIU. And I think that is immensely important because it means that for the first time since 1652, there is at least some prospect that some of the people who are engaged in this sort of activity will be caught. I agree absolutely that the rot goes very deep, but I mean, the old cliche is right. You have to start somewhere, and the hope is that a couple of high-profile prosecutions might begin to start turning the tide.
Professor Ntlekena, you don't think, assuming you agree with Professor Friedman on this one, but we should also remember that people then went on to get what they couldn't get from the public or from the rest of the citizens to agree with them on via ANC resolutions. That's how the Scorpions were killed, and that's how a lot of other things happened. Is there no chance at all that something like that could happen? The likes of Mkhize get other people who are running away from prosecution or who have to pay back the money to actually use ANC conferences to get what they cannot get, through courts of law or get protection from being prosecuted?
Well, I think in this case you lack a victim of sorts. During Thabo Mbeki's time, you had JZ as the victim, who was being. They managed to weave together some argument that he was being persecuted by the president, by Thabo Mbeki. And Thabo Mbeki obviously had managed to amass a lot of enemies from the early 2000s, partly because he had a strong hand in influencing appointments in the various provinces in the country, asserting central control over, local ANC offices. Because Thabo was big on competence. I mean, this was adopted actually in 1997, where they said requirements for service in government place a lot of premium on competence. And so, when you're looking for government leaders, you're not just looking at popularity, you're also looking at competence to run, a sophisticated economy. And so his involvement in the appointment of premiers, of mayors, and all that created a lot of resentment. And so those enemies then were able to rally behind JZ and used him pretty much. They didn't support JZ, that they were just anti-Thabo to open up the space for themselves to get access to patronage. So you don't have that kind of a scenario, I think, playing itself out this time around.
Okay. And that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks to both of you, Professors Mkhize Ndletyana and Stephen Friedman, for your insights. And that's all we had for you this evening. To join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.